The Lord has given me a word to bring today entitled Amazing Grace. I began to share with you about grace last week. And I want to share with you the lyrics of the song Amazing Grace that was written 236 years ago, I think. How's that? It was written in 1779. That's a long time ago. That's older than me. Praise God. And listen to the lyrics of this song. It says, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. The many dangers, toils, and snares we have already come, or through many dangers, toils, and snares we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. The Lord has promised good to me. I love that. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. When we've been here 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we've first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, praise God. Aren't those wonderful words? Friends, we really need to fully understand and appreciate the grace of God. In order to appreciate who and what we are, we have to understand and appreciate the grace of God. Because we are what we are, and we are who we are by the grace of God. And in order to appreciate what we've been delivered from, we need to understand and appreciate the grace of God. Because we're where we are only by that grace of God. Friends, grace, simply stated, means favor. It's all about God's favor. It's defined as the free and unmerited favor of God, grace is, as manifested, listen, in the salvation of sinners and the bestowal of blessings. Ooh. God's grace is all about Him bestowing blessings on your life. Amazing grace, isn't it? And today the Lord would have me share with you and help reveal to you a picture of us, His church, and of the enormity of His grace and favor that He pours out on us from all the way back in the Old Testament. You know, it's said in the Old Testament that the Old Testament is the new concealed, and the New Testament is the old revealed. And the more I think about that, as I study the Word for all these years, the more I realize just how much truth there is in that. The Lord would have us look today, focus today, on the book of Ruth, which really was a snapshot of things to come for the New Testament believers and the New Testament church. First, church, we need to understand that Ruth was a Moabite. She came from Moab, which made her a Moabitess. And the Moabites were enemies of Israel. They came from Moab, the son of Lot. And Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 3, identifies them, the Moabites, the women in particular, as being used to lure the Hebrew men into sin. Isn't it interesting how the women are always blamed for luring the men into sin? Somebody's got to be responsible. Well, church, there was an Israelite man named Elimelech. And Elimelech had a wife named Naomi, and they had 2 sons. They lived in Bethlehem, and they were very hungry. There was a very severe famine. Well, word was that there was more than enough in Moab. So they set out for Moab, and they lived there. Not too long after arriving, Elimelech died. And soon after, the 2 sons married Moabite women, one of which was a young woman named Ruth. Within 10 years, both sons were dead. And there's Naomi in a foreign land with 2 Moabite daughter-in-laws, or daughters-in-law. Now, Naomi planned on returning to Bethlehem because word was that the Lord was providing and that the famine was over. So it was time for Naomi to separate from the young women that were married to her now deceased sons. And in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 14, it says that Orpah, every time I look at it, I think it's Oprah. It's O-R-P-A-H. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but then it says, but Ruth clung to her. Now, Naomi urged Ruth to go back to her family as Orpah did, but Ruth wouldn't have it. Now listen to these revealing words. In chapter 1 and verse 16, I'm reading from the NIV, it says, but Ruth replied, this she was speaking to Naomi, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Church, she did exactly what Romans 10:9 said we have to do to be saved. She confessed the Lord. This represents right here the born-again experience. She willingly gave up the old life. She had a life. She had a past home. She had a family. But she chose not to go back to that old life. Instead, she turned from her past. She grabbed hold of and clung to her new life. She adopted a new people and confessed a new faith. She now abandoned her Moabite god, Chemosh, and embraced Naomi's God, Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim. Church, this is really profound. This is exactly what happens or what needs to happen in each one of our lives when we make a decision, when we choose to leave the old life so that old things can be passed away. They're not passed away if you're still living them every day. They're passed away when you leave them and move on. Now, as I had mentioned, Naomi was planning on returning to her hometown, which was Bethlehem. Naomi concluded from her conversation with Ruth that Ruth was not going to be deterred. Nothing was going to change her mind. She was with Naomi now, and that was it. She had a new life, a new God, a new hope, a new family, a new future, and she was getting on with it. So together they traveled. Off to Bethlehem they went. And it's interesting that they arrived in Bethlehem just in time for the beginning of a whole new season. It's really interesting how God works these things out. They arrived at the very beginning of the barley harvest. Now remember why they were fleeing where they were in the first place. They left Bethlehem because there was a famine. They went to Moab, and as they returned to Bethlehem, here's this giant harvest taking place. And this was a pivotal point for Naomi, who in verses 20 and 21 said that she was bitter. She said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter. She said, because I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. When I left here, I had a husband. When I left here, I had 2 healthy sons. Now I'm coming back a widow. My sons are both dead. She was bitter. But church, her increase was about to come. She came at the very moment that everything was about to begin to turn in her life. Naomi had a newly saved daughter-in-law named Ruth, who was on fire, and she was expectant. Ruth was an Old Testament type of the New Testament church. And Ruth wasn't just going to sit around and complain. Instead, she was going to go and she was going to do. She was going to get up. I've shared many times that the Lord affects the outcome of our efforts. You can't just sit on a dock in a beach chair and expect fish to jump out of the water into your lap. But you can go to that same dock and drop your line in the water and expect God to put a fish on the end of it. And so He will. Ruth was believing for God's favor. In Ruth 2, I'm going to read verses 2 through 10. And again, I'm reading from the NIV. It says, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone, listen, in whose eyes I find favor. So what was she expecting to find? Favor. She didn't say, oh, if only someone will have favor. No, she said, I'm going into the fields. I'm going to pick up what's left behind because I'm expecting favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. Can you imagine this now? Are you getting what this is all about? There's a field full of grain. The landowner hires a bunch of people to go out and harvest the grain. As they're going, there's some falling by the wayside behind them, and here's this young lady picking up what they're missing and picking up what they're leaving behind. Verse 3, so she went out into the field, began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. In other words, he was kin to Naomi's husband. Verse 4, Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Aha, these were godly people. Verse 5, Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" Which would lead me to believe that Ruth was probably a looker, because he instantly noticed her. Ooh, who is she? Where did she come from? He knew that she wasn't one of his slaves. He knew that she wasn't an employee. Where'd she come from? Verse 6, the overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." Small world, small town, everybody knew one another. They were family. Boaz knew the whole story. Verse 7, she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." That's what she said. That's what he's saying. He said, he's telling Boaz, this is what she said when she got here. "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." In other words, it's going to go to waste if I don't pick it up. It's just going to go to waste. She came into the field and has remained here from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Verse 8, so Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here." He liked her. Don't go. Twice in one sentence. Don't go. Don't go. "Stay here with the women who work for me." Verse 9. "Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, listen to this. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" A foreigner. Church, Ruth had been a foreigner, but was a foreigner no more. Just like you and me. We're no more strangers and foreigners to God, the word says. And just like Ruth, we have every reason in the world to expect God's favor upon our lives. Ephesians 2:19 says, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household." Do you see how she was treated by Boaz? As one of his own. Oh, but it's just the beginning. Friends, it took the Messiah, the Redeemer, to abolish separation and open the floodgates of grace and favor to all who believe. Listen. Verse 14 of Ruth 2. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." You do that in a good restaurant. Huh? They put the nice bread on the table. They put a little dish with some olive oil, and you sop. Come over here. Now this girl was wondering where the next meal was coming from. Next thing you know, she's sitting at the owner's table, dining with the owner of the fields. It says when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. "Here, honey, eat this." She ate all she wanted and had some left over. This is truly your cup running over. Church, this is called favor. She had been starving. They just came back, 2 women alone with no visible source of income, trying to figure out how they were going to make a living. This young woman who just got saved. Now, if you remember before when I read to you about Amazing Grace, it says How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. The grace of God came on this young woman as soon as she declared Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim to be her God. Instantly, the favor of God was there, and she knew it. Instantly, she said, I'm going to go out to those fields, and I'm going to find favor with somebody out there. And she did, and she got what she believed for. Church, this is like Jesus saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Verse 15 now, in Ruth 2. As she got up to glean, now she's finished sopping, having her bread and vinegar and oil and her roasted grain, and she's got her leftovers. She got a doggy bag. She did. She brought a doggy bag home to Naomi. She's now ready to go back to work. Listen, verse 15. Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Wait a minute. Gathering amongst the sheaves means she wasn't picking up the leftovers anymore. She was picking up just like they were. She was grabbing whole sheaves of grain, and he wanted her to. Verse 16, he said, even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. Don't rebuke her. Favor! He said, listen, you guys do the work, you pull them out, but then take them and lay them for her so she could just pick them up, so she wouldn't even have to strain herself. Church, this is the favor of God. Verse 17, so Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. I checked that out to see how much that is. It's about 3/4 of a bushel. That's quite a bit of grain. She carried it back to town in verse 18, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So she not only had 3/4 of a bushel basket full of grain, but she also had a doggy bag. Verse 19, her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? When she saw what she came back with, she says, where did this come from? Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Listen to what she says now. Church, you got to listen to this, because this is God speaking to you. She said, blessed be the man who took notice of you. She says, blessed is this man who took notice of you. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today, very innocently, is Boaz. Boaz? Verse 20, the Lord bless him. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. He's been known to be kind. He's a giver. She added, that man is our close relative. Listen to this. He is one of our kinsman-redeemers. You know what a redeemer is? Somebody that's going to pay the price on your behalf. And you know what kin is? Family. Family. She says this man is family who's willing to pay the price for us. Friends, Ruth, young, naive, newly saved, she hadn't put the pieces together yet. She was unaware that she had this wealthy relative, as it referred to Boaz in verse 1 of chapter 2. She just saw her life getting better and better, saw herself prospering more and more, never knowing why. And like Ruth, church, there's a kinsman-redeemer that's taken notice of you. There's a Jesus out there that's got his eye on you. Jesus, church, is our kinsman Redeemer, our relative that has come to save us. He's come to redeem us. He's come to bless us. He has come to prosper us. He has come to show you favor. You all with me on this? I'm not losing you, am I? Don't let this get away. Your blessing is being sent out to you by way of these words today. These words that are going out today, they're not my words, they're His words. And they're capsules. And what they're doing is they're sending out little keys so you can unlock all the little doors to get all the blessings that God has in store for your lives. Church, eventually, Ruth married Boaz, in which case she became a type of a bride of Christ. Ooh, again, the church. Favor. Ruth came to know favor. She came to live in favor. She came to become one with the source of all favor. Listen, she started out as an enemy of the people of God. But listen to this. She became David's great-grandmother. Therefore, she was at the headwaters of the lineage of Jesus Christ Himself. A woman that had been a foreigner, a stranger from the promises and the covenants of God. Church, it doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what sins you may have committed in your past. You need to treat them like Moabites. You need to leave them in your past, and you need to go that way and stop looking back. Want to hear something good now? Church, Ruth chose to leave the old behind. It was her decision. No one influenced her to do otherwise. In fact, Naomi encouraging her to go back where she came from. But Ruth chose to leave the old life behind. And when she did, wait till you hear what she left behind. Naomi had 2 sons that died in Moab, husbands of these young women. The one's name was Chilion. You know what it means in Hebrew? Wasting. Wasting. And Mahlon was the other, M-A-H-L-O-N. And in Hebrew, you know what it means? Sickness. So what did they really leave dead in Moab? Friends, when you're in Christ, your Kinsman-Redeemer, all things that would bring waste into your life, all things that are wasting away in your life, are left dead.